Welcome to Maisha Kazidi. Today, we are so honored to have Margaret Kimberley as our guest on this show. Margaret Kimberley is the executive director and senior columnist of the Black Agenda Report and the current host of Black Agenda Radio podcast, which I encourage us to listen to. She has also written a book, Prejudential Black America and the Presidents, which was published in 2020 by the Steerforth Press. And she has given a talk or a speech at the UN Security Council about the US government involvement in the Ukraine war. And she has received several awards for her media and journalism. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much. It's really great to have you. Like I told you, I have been following Black Agenda Report since the days of the Black Commentator. So I really appreciate your perspective on things, and that's why I'm happy to have you here.
Thank you. It's great.
You are a member of the Black Agenda Report, and it's an unapologetically Black left platform. So maybe you can tell us, what was your own personal journey to coming to this consciousness where you don't fall within the two main parties? And yeah.
Well, I grew up like most Black people, like 90% of Black people in the United States. My parents were members of the Democratic Party, which from the 1960s, from the liberation movement, that usually referred to as the civil rights movement, was the party of preference for most Black people. It was how do I describe it? It's not like that now, but in those days it was the left of center party. It was the more left party. That's not true any longer. So that was my political identity for most of my life. And all that began to change starting in about the year 2000, after the election was stolen from Al Gore. And it was strange to me that a presidential election could be stolen, and the corporate media went along with it, and ultimately Democrats went along with it, even though their party was the loser. And that began to radicalize me when I saw there was more collusion between the two parties than there was any real opposition. And I became familiar with a publication called blackcommentator.com. Excuse me. And the founders were, Glenn Ford was a co-founder. And I began to read, and I can't remember how it came to me, but how I became introduced to Black Commentator, but I did. And I became a regular reader. It was not just news of interest to Black people, but it's from a political perspective I personally was not as familiar with. And I wrote a letter, and Glenn published it. And at the time, social media didn't exist yet. There were blogs, weblogs. People would give their opinions on their own sites. And I knew people doing this. I was like, well, why can't I start giving my opinion? Anyway, I asked Glenn if I could write an article, and I can't even remember what it was about. So he took a chance on me. He encouraged me. Glenn passed away several years ago. And I started to write. He asked me, do you want to write all the time? And I said, he said, it's hard to write something every week. He said, are you sure you want to do that? And I impulsively said, yes, I can do that. But I did discover it was difficult to write every week. But I'm glad I did. It was great training for me. And for a variety, that was like 2003, 2004. And for a variety of reasons, the other co-founder of Black Commentator was Peter Gamble. And we decided to have our own site, Black Agenda Report, which started in 2006. Glenn, Bruce Dixon, and myself, sadly, they've both passed away now. And they were both socialists. So unlike me, Glenn was, the term is a red diaper baby. He was raised to be a socialist his entire life. So he was raised by as a socialist. He spent some of his childhood and youth in Georgia, dividing his time between the state of New Jersey, which is right next to New York here, and the state of Georgia in the South. So he was a socialist who grew up in the segregated South, which gave him a very unique political perspective. And he came of age, and during the liberation movement, he was in the military, but he also was a member of the Black Panther Party as a young man. So he was a radical to make. Bruce Dixon also was a member of the Black Panther Party in Chicago. And so this was my first exposure to real radicalism. And I thought I was a leftist until I met people who really were leftists, who were really socialists, who were really anti-imperialist in their viewpoint. And that was my journey to meeting other people of that political perspective. So I was middle-aged at the time. I was early 40s, and discovered this new political point of view. So my eyes were opened, and world events proved them right. This was around the time of the US invasion of Iraq. Another theft, 2004, it's not talked about in the same way, but many of us believe George Bush also stole the election from John Kerry. And so once again, we saw this permanent government of Democrats and Republicans differing, not around the edges, but not as much as they led people to believe. So my consciousness grew. I learned a lot reading Black Agenda Report every week. I was, and that turned into an exposure to other people who were radicals, other people who were socialists, other organizations. And over time, my consciousness grew and grew. So I tell people there's hope for everybody. I was a middle of the road Democrat for most of my life. But the willingness to be open to learning new things, having the good fortune to meet people of a different political viewpoint was quite instrumental.
Okay. And you said your parents were and you kind of from the beginning you were leaning towards the Democratic Party, but that's the party of segregation, wasn't it? Before
yes, it was. There was a change in US politics. The segregated South, those were Democrats, rural Southerners. Now, there were also Democrats in the North as well, but that part of the country was, that was the Democratic Party until the mid-60s. Now, what happened is, and Lyndon Johnson was from Texas, and he was a member of the Democrats. Now, let me go back a little. Lyndon Johnson was John Kennedy's vice president. And generally, the person at the top of the ticket, the presidential candidate, chooses a running mate to be their vice president. And usually there had to be some balance, regional balance or ideological balance. So Kennedy was a Northerner from Massachusetts, and so he chose a Southerner to be his running mate. Running mate is the colloquial term. So that means John Kennedy, he was not a champion of the civil rights movement. He was very cautious. The excuse Democrats in the North always gave was, well, we could lose support in the South and we need them for something or other. We can't pass any legislation. It can't be anything that they would be opposed to. So the Kennedys do not, I believe, deserve as much credit as they get for being friends of the civil rights movement or of Dr. King. The Kennedys, after all, gave the FBI permission to surveil Martin Luther King, to tap his phone, and others in the movement. So Kennedy's assassinated, Johnson becomes president. And this is at the height of the movement of protest against segregation. And because of the mobile, and I always remind people of this, it was the constant protest, the constant demand, the constant mobilization of Black people, which moved Lyndon Johnson. So he should not get credit for being one of these quote unquote good for Black people presidents. And so he was forced to champion legislation like the Voting Rights Act, like the Civil Rights Act. But that began the switch in parties because many Black people were Republicans into the 50s and early 60s. But then the Democratic Party became the party of Black people. And slowly over time, just to point out something about Johnson, when he ran in 1964, he was the last Democrat to get a majority of the votes of white Americans. Ever after 1964, Republicans get the majority of votes from white people in presidential elections. Now, it's interesting, these same people may vote for a Democrat for a Senate seat or governor or a member of Congress, but the presidency itself, Republicans get the votes of most white Americans. And that has been true for the last 60 years. So slowly but surely, you saw in the South in particular, there are hardly any white Democrats. Now, into the 90s, people like Bill Clinton and Al Gore, they were from Southern states and they were Democrats. But that was like the last of the white Democratic representatives in Southern states. So yes, that's a longish explanation for how the party of this, that was the party of the segregated South, became the Black People's Party.
And then the white voters began to leave. I didn't know that part. I did not.
Yeah, it was they call it the Richard Nixon, I'm forgetting the Southern strategy, they called it, of appealing to white people, not just in the South, but throughout the country. There was a reaction, they say there's what is the law of physics? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. I guess that's true in politics too. There was a reaction against the liberation movement. And that was something that Republicans really emphasized in order to get support from white people. So that's been true for many years now.
I didn't know that. Okay. Maybe we could go back and then I'll bring you forward to explain what happened then with the Obama presidency. But could we go back to what were elections like before the Civil War? Who was voting? How was it done? Yeah.
Well, let me just say one thing. In the United States, women could not vote until 1920. So if you're talking about any elections, the Constitution was ratified 1791, I believe. So from 1790s through the 1800s into the early 20s, only men could vote. Only white men, and in some cases, only white men who had property could vote. So the franchise was very limited. It was very restricted. Obviously, Black people, even those who were free, most Black people were enslaved, even those who were free and for the most part were not allowed to vote. So it was white men who could vote. And that tells you quite a lot about the founding of the United States. So when we talk about democracy or the founding of the country, we have to remember it was not very democratic. And, people like to pass over that and sugarcoat it. But you can't. And there are a variety of political parties and iterations. There were Whigs, the Democratic Party has its roots in the early 1800s, but that was the party of the slave states, as you know, as I was pointing out, which became the states of segregation. The Republican Party began as an effort to stop the spread of slavery. So Abraham Lincoln became president. It was a new party, the Republicans, and their goal was to stop the spread of slavery into the new territories. Now, there were some, they were called radical Republicans, who were anti-slavery, who were abolitionists, who wanted to get rid of slavery. Then there were people like Lincoln, who just wanted to keep slavery out of the new territories. So what do I mean by the new territories? As the country went to the west, and let's be honest, stole Indian lands and increased white settlements. So the beginnings of the U.S. are along the eastern seaboard, the east coast of the United States, the original 13 colonies from Massachusetts on down to Georgia. As the country went west, and that was the purpose of the American Revolution, was because the British were telling the settlers, the colonists, you cannot go west because that complicated things for them and their relations with France and treaties with Indians. And they broke free in order, in large part, to make sure that they could keep encroaching across the continent. So nobody should believe anything about democracy and wanting to be free of British tyranny and any of that. So the country keeps the frontier expands and expands and expands as Indian lands are encroached upon. And the issue in every new state is, should there be slavery or not? And this was a very contentious issue. And, you know, everybody who was anti-slavery was not a friend of Black people. So there were white people who weren't wealthy enough to be slaveholders. They didn't want slavery, or there were workers, and a slave labor force undercut their ability to earn a living. So there were people who did not want slavery, who sometimes were very racist, or they just didn't want Black people around at all. But at any rate, the issue of slavery played quite a role in the development of the Republican Party. So they took the stance that slavery should not be anywhere new in any these states that come into the Union. And there were a variety of compromises. There was one, what was it called? If a free state enters the Union, a slave state can, but a slave state can't come in unless there's also a free state. So that was one effort at a compromise. There were geographical compromises. Well, above this latitude, you can have slavery, and you can't have it, and below it, you can. But all of this, ultimately, all these compromises ended with the Civil War in 1861.
So could you talk about the 3/5 compromise and the electoral colleges? Are they linked, or they are two separate things?
Well, in order to, from the beginning of the country, there was a dilemma. The states that had slavery wanted representation is determined by population. So you have a certain number of congressional seats based on population. So a large state with a large population like New York or California has many congressional seats. A state with a tiny population may have only one or two. So now there's a problem in the slaveholding states, because they want to count enslaved people, but if you're counting them as people, then how do you justify slavery? So this was one of the first compromises, that enslaved people were considered 3/5 of a person, which gave those states representation without acknowledging the humanity of enslaved people. So
does that mean slaves could vote? It's just that their vote was counted less?
Enslaved people had no legal rights, none whatsoever. Well, for the most part, had no legal rights at all. But if you're considered 3/5 of a person in the state of, let's say, Georgia, you can count the enslaved people to get representation in Congress. Now, if you're 3/5 of a person and not a full person, then you can justify enslavement, but you also don't give up the representation you get from having that population count towards your representation in Washington. So it was considered a compromise. Does that help?
Okay, so it's something like if I have 50,000 slaves, my state includes 30,000 extra as a population.
Right. And it helps helps that state get more representation in Congress.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's not been clear. I mean, people.
Yeah, so but if you said 50,000 people, then it's like, well, wait a minute, if they're people, how are they enslaved? So it was a way to gain population without undermining the legal legitimacy of slavery. So that was the 3/5. Now, the Electoral College, it's rather complicated. Every state gets, you have to get, currently it's 270 electoral votes in order to be elected president. And these electoral votes, it's the same number of congressional seats that a state has. So a state with a big population like Florida or Texas or California has many electors. And there's some states with a small population, they may only have one or two. And the people, the so-called founding fathers, they did not believe in, some of them didn't want to have elections at all. Some of them want to have a monarchy again. So this was a way of guaranteeing that the population did not fully, decide who became president. And but to this day, more than 200 years later, we still have an electoral college. So as I said, the number of electors is determined by the population of the state. And what that means is, it's a weird quirk of this country, is there are a small number of states that really count in an election. So what do I mean? So here in New York, the Democrat will win. So they don't bother, nobody spends resources in New York because, the Democrat will win. Nobody campaigns in Texas because, the Republicans will win. So why are you spending time and money in Texas when it's going to go for the Republicans? But Pennsylvania they call them swing states. So it can go for Obama and then go for Trump, but then go back to Biden. So there are basically 6 states right now that are in contention for Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, which can be won by Democrats or Republicans. Now, so people in those states will actually see a campaign. Nobody's going to come. People come to New York to raise money from rich people, but we don't see presidential campaign commercials because no one's going to spend time here when they know that the Democrat is, in this case, Kamala Harris, is going to win the state. So that's one of the legacies of this very strange system of governance. But it was the reason we have an electoral college is that the so-called founders did not really believe that the public should have a say. So they came up with these subterfuges to take political power away from, even though they had a very limited franchise, it was only men, it was only white men, it was only white men with property. Even so, they did not want to have this a popular vote count.
I've just thought of it now that you mentioned electors, that Europe used to have electors, like Germany had electors. This guy who votes on behalf of the state.
Oh God, now I have to remember my European history. I think, is that like the Holy Roman Emperor? And,
yes.
and they
Yeah, the Holy
Yes, yes.
Roman Empire, yeah.
When it wasn't really German,
Yes, yeah.
not a
Yeah,
German
sorry,
state.
yeah.
There was this collection of little
Electors.
monarchies and so forth. Yes, yes. And I don't know if that's connected. That's a good question.
Yeah,
And
because that's the first time I heard of the concept of electors. So who chooses the electors? I mean, how do they decide who electors are? Is it people or is it the state? Yeah, what's an elector?
it depends. It depends on the state. Sometimes it's the member of Congress. These are the people who are politically active. It varies from state to state. Most of them just whoever wins, they agree to give their votes to the person who won their state. So New York State has, I think it's like 25 electoral votes. So the electors in New York State, they will all vote for the win, whoever wins New York State. Now, this quirk of the system is that your vote only counts in the state where you live. It doesn't count towards an overall total. And that is how many people decide how they're going to vote. So, for example, I'm a member of the Green Party now, and people say, well, if you vote for the Green, the Democrat is going to lose. So some people say, if you live in a quote unquote safe state where you know the Democrat or the Republican is going to win, you should vote however you want. But if you live in Michigan, which is a swing state, you should forego what you really want and vote for the Democrat. I don't believe in that, frankly. I think we need a new system. And I'm not afraid of Democrats. When they lose, it's their own fault, frankly.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just wanted to mention that as well.
Okay. Yeah, I wondered why there was that campaign against the Democrats saying if you don't vote for us, you're voting for
Yeah, it's it can be very close, and they try to discourage people from being independent, and not just discourage. Democrats actively have tried to keep the Green Party off the ballot, and every state. So you have this crazy quilt of rules about who can be on the ballot. So there are 50 states. There are 50 different rules for determining whether a party can be represented on the ballot. So here in the state of New York, we used to be able to vote for Green candidates, but the last governor passed this law. It raised the threshold. Most states, you have some kind of nominating process. It's usually signatures on a petition, and you need a certain number to get ballot status. And in New York, they just raised the threshold tremendously to a number that no one other than Democrats or Republicans can reach. So they kicked the Green Party off the ballot. Now it's things like that are going on. There are court cases. The state of Wisconsin tried to, Democrats in the state of Wisconsin tried to keep the Green Party off the ballot. There was a lawsuit. The Greens are on the ballot. Fortunately, they won that fight. So that's corruption. There's no other word for it to say that our victory, in this case of the Democrats, our victory depends upon making sure that people don't have the choices that they want. That if you want to vote for Green, you can't in this state or that state because we don't want you on the ballot because we think it diminishes our chances of winning. Now, I think not only is this wrong, but I also think it's a faulty logic. I don't think any Greens are somebody who doesn't want to vote for the Democrat is going to vote for the Democrat when Democrats kick their party off the ballot. I don't think that's going to happen. But the Democrats keep moving to the right. They used to be the center-left party. Now they're center-right. The Republicans are far-right. Democrats are center-right. And they stand for less and less there. And it's the influence of money. It's the influence of money in politics. And in the 1990s, the Democrats made a decision to be as much a corporate party as the Republicans. And so now you have a party that whose direction is determined by rich people. I call them oligarchs. You know, people talk about Russian oligarchs, or some country we're told we're not supposed to like. They have an oligarchy. Well, we have an oligarchy too. And people with lots of money, corporations, they determine who the president's going to be. And the Democrats, having gone along with this system, now want to minimize democracy. And so what they want to do is to like thread this needle where they don't really differ that much from Republicans, but they still want to win. So rather than taking a position that is popular, by the way, that most people want, there's a small number of issues where they differ with Republicans, and they still hope to win. And because they don't really stand for people, there wouldn't be a Green Party if the Democratic Party actually stood for the things it claims to speak for, that it speaks for working people, that it's a party that promotes justice, a party that promotes equality and civil rights. If they really were that party, I believe they would win more convincingly. They wouldn't have to worry about a smaller party. But that's not what they want to do. They're a party controlled by an oligarchy, and so they want to keep other parties out.
So what I'm hearing is that America has always distrusted the voice of the people. Even when it was only white men voting, they still didn't want ordinary people having a say. And so they just keep on inventing these rules that make it difficult. Because what I'm hearing is that it's so difficult. There are too many rules governing the whole electoral process. So I even wonder if I wanted to run, let's say I'm a resident of Pennsylvania, and I want to run for the presidency, what do I have to do legally? What's the process?
Well, I don't know Pennsylvania's rules, but you would have to get nominating petitions. It varies from state to state. So a state may say you need 5,000 signatures and you can be on the ballot. Another state may say you need 50,000 signatures to be on the ballot. And that generally means having a political organization. That means having money. So could you file to be a presidential candidate? You could, but are you really going to be on the ballot without money and organization? No, you won't. So that determines whether people could actually vote for you. Now, only American citizens can vote in federal elections. Only American citizens can make political contributions. That's true everywhere.
Yeah.
But as far as being able to be on the ballot, you have to have money and you have to have organization behind you, or it isn't going to happen.
That's too complicated.
It's very complicated. And then some states you can, so for example, here in New York, so the Green Party is no longer on the ballot, but you could do a write-in. So you can go to the polls or vote by mail, and you could write in Jill Stein, who's the Green Party candidate. Some states don't allow a write-in candidacy. So if the party's not on the ballot, you still can't write somebody in. You just can't vote for anybody who's not on the ballot.
Meaning on the ballot, there's a space for you to write the name of the person you want.
Yes, you can. If that person's name isn't on the ballot, you could write in, you know, Mickey Mouse, or, you know, whatever you wanted to. Or, you know, and that's like a bad joke, but you can. Yeah. So here in New York, I can go to the polls and I can say, I want to write in a name. I could vote for myself. I could vote for, you know, anybody else. In this case, I would vote for the Green Party candidate, but that's difficult to do. It's very difficult to do.
I think a conversation you were in, there was something about the Green Party voters being taken to court, being sued by the Democrats. What was that? Or I don't know whether I got it right.
Uh, I probably was talking about the state of North Carolina,
Okay.
where the Democrats were trying to keep the Greens from being on the ballot. And as I said, there's a nominating process. You sign petitions to, in support of a party. So in North Carolina, the Democrats, so after the Greens got enough signatures to be on the ballot in the state of North Carolina. And so the Democrats tried to get them off. So they went directly to people and said, we think you should change your mind and you don't really want to support the Green Party. So they went to people's homes, they called them on the phone in an effort to get people to change their minds and remove their signature from the Greens nominating petitions. Very few people actually did that. There was a court battle, and the decision was that the Greens are still on the ballot in North Carolina.
They got the list of the Green Party
People who
nominees.
signed, I mean, this is public information. So if you live
Criminal?
in North Carolina, you can sign John, and the Green Party comes to you and says, will you sign our nominating petition? And your name's John Doe or Jane Doe, and you sign the petition. And it's public information. So
Okay.
the Democratic Party, they spent money going to these people and saying, you don't really want to support the Greens, do you? And the Greens, of course, sued the Democrats, and they ended up the Green Party is still on the ballot in North Carolina. But that's the kind of thing that they do to stop, all this talk of democracy in the United States is phony. It's phony because the oligarchy decides who you're going to have the option to vote for. It costs, if you want to run, every state has 2 senators and a number of congressional seats based on population. You have to raise $30 million in here in New York where I live. You have to raise $30 million and able to run a viable campaign for one of our 2 Senate seats. Now, what does that tell you? If you have to raise that kind of money, who's going to have access when you're in Washington? Who are you going to listen to? Are you going to listen to the voice of the people? Or are you going to listen to the people who put you there, who really put you there because they gave you all this money? So are you going to vote against the weapons manufacturers? Are you going to vote against the pharmaceutical companies who want to make sure that any efforts to reduce the cost of prescription drugs is thwarted? Are you going to vote against Wall Street when they want to get rid of regulations? Are you going to do? No. So the people with the access are the people who raise the money. And that means all our talk of democracy, really, we need to take a serious look before we keep using this word, because it becomes meaningless. If you can't, if nobody even has the option of voting for you, unless you can raise $30 million, then you don't have a democracy.
So I want us to go through 3 personalities, or maybe 4, in terms of how they got where they did in the election system. The first I would like to talk about is, of course, Barack Obama. How did he get voted in with this kind of system?
And how did he become president? Just the way I said, he raised a lot
How
of
did
money.
he get? Yeah.
He, Obama personally has the skill to lead people to believe that they were getting something new, and he had the best people in marketing him. So he was marketing himself as a progressive. We're going to have change, hope and change, 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 change. The campaign is not a campaign; it's a movement. Appealing to people who wanted that. They're so cynical. They know what people want. And so they pretend they're giving people what they want. So in this case, he was supposedly anti-war, and this was at the time of the Iraq War when he was first elected to the Senate. Now he said he was opposed to that war, but when asked about it, when asked, had you been in the Senate, would you have voted for it or not? He actually said, I'm not sure how I would have voted. But he was promoted as being anti-war, which tells you people don't want wars. People don't want their money spent on the military. So he raised $1 billion. Now, people who raise $1 billion, are they going to really be for the people? So, for example, the Obamacare healthcare plan, it did help a lot of people. There were elements of it that it did not get rid of this privatized healthcare system. So, excuse me, so health insurers could not, you couldn't be excluded because you had a pre-existing condition. That's a good thing. It allowed parents to keep their kids on their policy until they were 26. That's a good thing. It expanded the Medicaid program, the program of providing government program to provide health care to people who are low income. That's a good thing, but it also enshrined the system of private care. Instead of having a public health care system run by the state, which most supposedly advanced countries have, you still have these private health insurers who can deny you care, who can charge what they want. And that was the reality. So the countries moved so far to the right, this health plan, which didn't reduce the cost. You know, we have a very expensive healthcare system, and that's because it's profit driven. So right next door in Canada, for example, where they have a government healthcare system, they have the same outcomes. Canadians have the same life expectancy as people in the US, but they spend less. Americans, we have this illusion of choice that we have the best healthcare system in the world. Well, why do we have the same outcomes as a country that has a national healthcare system? So the money goes to the health insurers, it goes to big pharma, the pharmaceutical companies. So this was, and it was a political victory, but it was not this great, it was not as it's been presented. So, and the country is so far to the right, this actually conservative plan was painted as being left wing. So Obama gets to appeal to people who did want something different, who did want something further to the left, when that's not what they got at all. So Obama is a smart man who knows how to play the system. He knew how to appeal to the rich people who decide whether you're going to be president or not, but also present himself as this new man of the people. So that, in short, is how he got to be president.
So which white voters voted for him?
Liberals in the Northeast, in the so-called blue states, the states that are mostly Democratic are called blue. States that are mostly Republican are called red. So upper middle class, educated white people in certain parts of the country. Black people came out in droves to vote for him. States that never went for Democrats suddenly, turned Democratic when he was running, because a lot of Black people who were just disaffected from the system came out to vote for him. Now, when his name was no longer on the ballot, those people who were disaffected went right back to not voting again, which is how Hillary Clinton lost. So the states that went for him and then turned to Trump, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, there's sizable Black populations in all of those states. Those people who were disaffected and didn't vote before Obama went right back to being disaffected. And so it was, and nobody in the Democratic Party thought about that. I thought about it. I remember saying, this isn't going to happen again. You're not going to have a state like Ohio, which had been Republican, and suddenly the Black people there come out in droves. They're going to come out in droves for someone else. And of course, they did not. And Hillary Clinton lost. So,
did she try to appeal to the Blacks to get out the vote, or
she did. She
made
did
an
not have a
assumption?
good. She did one of the biggest reason Hillary Clinton lost to Trump. She assumed she was going to have the same people who voted for Obama would vote for her. Now, most Obama voters were not going to vote for Trump, but there were Obama voters who weren't going to vote at all when he was no longer in the running any longer. And so she counted on having this same level of enthusiasm that Obama had. And I don't know why she thought that. Obama had a great get out the vote effort. People going door to door, canvassing, very personal appeals, um, uh, and she didn't do that. She thought that she was going to get the same level of enthusiasm, and it was very basic. It's politics 101. You never just assume you're going. And she believed all the polls which said she was going to win. Forgetting about the electoral college. It's like, well, what did the polls say in those states that Trump managed to switch to his side? Trump is one of those people who there are a lot of people who are going to vote for him who won't tell a pollster that they're going to vote for him. So whatever the poll tells you about Trump's level of support, you have to realize it's actually more. And so it was her own fault that that she lost. She'll never admit it. The Democratic Party will never admit it. Her name should be mud with Democrats. I don't understand people who at the same time that they talk about how horrible Trump is, they won't point their finger at her, which is, I think, what you should do. But and that's a whole other story, though.
Can you tell me the story of Bernie then? I mean, what was the dynamics of what was going on? How far did he get in the nomination process?
Bernie Sanders?
Yeah.
In 2020, I'm sorry, in 2016, he represented the left wing of the Democratic Party. He's actually officially an independent, but he always votes with the Democrat, and he's thought of as a Democrat. And he challenged Hillary Clinton for the nomination. And he did very well in the primaries. Now, primaries are the way that states determine who a party nominee is going to be. So you have these elections across the country which are supposed to determine how you get the nominee. Now, Hillary Clinton did win. She did get more, and then the people vote for delegates, and they go to a convention, and they officially nominate. She actually beat Bernie Sanders, but he came very close. And she was not prepared to have been opposed. And she's a very bad politician. I keep hearing Hillary Clinton's a smart person. She's not at all. So I'll give you one example of something she did. You know, after they leave the presidency, most US presidents make a lot of money. They cash out, they give speeches, they get paid millions of dollars, usually by corporate interests. And that's the kind of things you do after you leave office. Now, Hillary Clinton was acting like she was already president. So she gave speeches with for the investment bank Goldman Sachs, for example, made a lot of money. And that's something you do after you leave the White House. When you're campaigning, you pretend to be a person of the people. But she, of course, being, not as smart as she thinks she is, she thought that was a good idea before she ran for president. So then Bernie Sanders attacked her, rightly, I think, saying, why are you getting paid by an investment bank to speak? They don't represent the interests of the people. And this was after the 2008 Wall Street crash, the recession, when so many people lost jobs, when the Goldman Sachs and the other financial industry were bailed out by the government, by Barack Obama. He's the one who bailed out all these banks. So Bernie Sanders points out, he says, wait a minute, why are you making money with them? So that was an example of her lack of astuteness in doing things like that. So Bernie Sanders and his supporters, they were tired of being taken for granted by the Democratic Party, just being told, well, you don't have any choice. You have to go along with whatever the Democratic Party establishment says. You can't ask for Medicare for all, a way for everyone to be guaranteed health care. So he spoke for those people who voted for Obama but realized they didn't really get what they wanted, or those people who had been disaffected. And he got a lot more support than they anticipated. A friend of mine says that actually, had the Democrats been smarter, they would have thanked Bernie Sanders because he told them there was a lack of enthusiasm for Hillary Clinton. That's what his success did. It was a warning to them that they really had to do something different in order for Hillary Clinton to be elected. But of course, they did not pay attention. He was considered this irritant who got in the way, someone to be ignored, to be gotten rid of. Rather than as the person who was a harbinger, the person who told them, you've got a problem here. And then, of course, she goes on to lose to Trump. There was, unfortunately, very little willingness to talk about why she lost, and Trump, of course, he didn't govern this way, but he talked about the working class people whose jobs had been sent overseas. And he was going to be, the Republican Party should be the working people's party, he said. Now, that should have been Hillary Clinton's line. Instead, it was his. Now, did he do anything about that? Did he bring jobs back to the U.S.? No, he didn't. But he did it enough, and enough people thought he would, to peel off votes from Hillary Clinton. The issue of immigration, it's still it's still a major issue in U.S. politics. He said he was going to build a wall at the border with Mexico and make Mexico pay for it. But this was something Democrats had said as well. It's something that he really emphasized. So, and a lot of that was racist in nature, I want to say.
Yeah.
But he appealed to racism. Many people's racists liked him. I don't know why there's some people trying to say Trump's not a racist. Well, people who are openly racist voted for him and said that was why they voted for him. But the Democrats could have defeated Trump, but they messed up. He got in. Bernie Sanders tried to run again in 2020. Biden became the nominee. The oligarchs decided they didn't want Bernie to not only not get the nomination, but they wanted him to be gone. They didn't want there to be any possibility of someone in the left wing of the Democratic Party even getting any support. So they coalesced behind the other people running. They all dropped out. They chose Biden, and Biden got to be the nominee. Now, what's ironic is these same people took Biden out a couple of months ago.
Yeah. Good. We'll get to that, but I want to hear more about the third parties, like the Green Party. How there are many arguments against them, especially by the Democrats, about you're spoiling the vote, you're going to make Trump win. So what are they up against? And in terms of even, at least when we watch the debates from here, we don't see Jill Stein on the podium debating. So what are the issues that parties like the Green Party are grappling with, and how are they responding? What's their argument against some of these lines by the Democratic Party?
Well, the Green Party is up against collusion between the Democrats and the corporate media. So the corporate media either ignores the Green Party or vilifies them. And so it's either an attack or being excluded. So the Green Party is excluded from debates. So they'll say you have to have a certain amount of support in the polls, or they'll come up with something that the Green Party can't meet, and then say, sorry, you can't be in the debate. So there's that exclusion that's being kept off the ballot, as I described before, being kept out of debates, being ignored, not getting any public attention. If you look at the Green Party platform, it's what most people want. People want a national healthcare system. They want Medicare for all, as it's called. People don't want all the military spending. It's more than $800 billion for the Defense Department. People don't want that. People don't want the country to be at war, so or to fund wars around the world. People want the government to work for them, to actively do things on their behalf. So the Greens are painted as being far left, and we're on the left of the spectrum. But when you look at what the platform says, people want environmental protections. All this, the Democrats pretend to be the environmentalist party. They aren't. There's as much fossil fuel production under Democrats as Republicans. There's even oil drilling on federal land owned by the federal government. And that doesn't change when there's a Democrat in office instead of a Republican. So the Green Party really believes in less fossil fuel production. It's the only thing that's going to save the planet. The planet's getting, every month, there's a new record set in the world's temperature. And this is a bad sign. I mean, that's an understatement to put it that way. But the Green Party is serious about really seriously reducing fossil fuel production. That's the only way to save humanity, to save life for humans and other species on the planet. And these are, as I said, it's what the people want, but it's not what the oligarchy wants. They don't want anybody to think that they should have these things. It just, it disrupts the system too much. So there are these active efforts to keep people from being able to vote for Greens or disparaging the Greens, and trying to mobilize people to be hostile to them, to us. So all of those things are at play. So the Green Party always has an uphill battle in getting on ballots, having people be able to vote for us, having people take us seriously, even when they have the opportunity to vote for us. And when Democrats lose, they never blame themselves. So when Al Gore lost in 2000, when Hillary Clinton lost in 2016, the Green Party was the Green Party's fault. They took votes from the Democrats as if the Democrats are owed someone's vote. And also, it's a ruse to minimize criticism of themselves. So nobody has to vote for you. So how do you get people's votes? Well, you appeal to them. I said the other day, I posted on the X platform, formerly Twitter. I said, what does a party do if they want votes of a particular group, or particular demographic group or constituency? You say something that appeals to that group. But they don't want to, but doing that places them, then they've got a problem, because they are the party of war as much as Republicans are. They are the party of military spending as much as Republicans are. They are the party of Wall Street as much as Republicans are. They are the party of imperialism as much as Republicans are. So they cannot take a stance on these issues. They're living on their past reputation. They're living on their marketing. And when there's someone who actually points out the differences, points out these discrepancies, then they can lose votes. So all they have is basically trying to undermine the democracy they claim to care about so much.
So could you explain what you mean by this term duopoly? And also, can you also talk about the term electable? Because in Kenya, we also have that problem. Our elections are reduced to 2 candidates. We are told, what's the point of voting this third or fourth person because he's not electable? So what's the point of a duopoly? Why does it exist, and what's the meaning of that term electable?
Well, the purpose of having a duopoly is to exclude. It's to exclude other voices. To have, and if Kenya is like the United States, you have two parties that aren't that different, but
Yes.
pretend to be, and they only want two. They don't want anybody else. They don't want people to have another choice. And there's a lot of agreement between them. I mean, I think most countries are like that. There are generally two major parties, one
Like
leftish,
Labour
one
and
rightish.
Labour and the Tories.
Yes, but the UK is very much like the US in that you have an allegedly left-wing party, which isn't anymore, which hasn't been for a long time. So it cuts off debate, it excludes other voices, so you control what is and is not going to be discussed, what is and is not going to be considered. So that's the purpose of having a duopoly, of making sure that people only have these two choices. And it doesn't, it works very, the last election in 2020, someone asked the CEO of Boeing Corporation if he favored Trump or Biden. Now, Boeing is a defense contractor. They manufacture airplanes for the major airlines in the US and around the world, but they're also a defense contractor. They're a weapons maker. And they asked the CEO, do you have a preference for Biden or Trump? And basically he said, I'm paraphrasing, they'll both support the defense industry. So no, we don't have a preference. They both care about, that's what he said. They both care about the defense of the country or something along those lines. So that's what the duopoly does. Boeing doesn't have to worry if there's a Democrat or a Republican in the White House. They're still going to get their money. They're still going to get millions of dollars in defense contracts. So that's the purpose of the duopoly. The Boeings of the world, Wall Street, all of them, they don't have to worry if there's a Democrat or a Republican. They are going to get what they want. Now, the two parties pretend, or they, well, not necessarily even pretend. I think the Democrats pretend more than Republicans, actually. So there are issues. So the issue of abortion rights, that's something Democrats allegedly care about more than Republicans do. And so they say, if you elect Kamala Harris in Democratic Congress, we're going to protect abortion rights. I don't think they will, but it's the sort of thing they do to galvanize votes. Or the Republicans, they will campaign on for people who want to restrict abortion rights. They say, we're for you. Or they claim they're going to cut the budget. So people who are fiscal conservatives will vote for Republicans because they claim they're going to cut the budget. They don't, by the way, but that's what they pretend. What they really will do is cut the budget for anything that helps people. They will do that. Although the Democrats also will, Obama had a plan, an austerity plan, and he was working with Republicans to cut the budget. Things like Social Security, which is the public pension system for retired people. And Democrats claim, oh, Republicans, they want to cut Social Security. Well, given the chance, Democrats will as well. Now, it all fell apart because of some opposition amongst Republicans. So, Mr. Hope and Change was willing to cut the Social Security program. So that's what the duopoly does. It allows them to coexist, to be in collusion with each other, and to ensure that other voices are excluded. That's really how the duopoly works.
And this lie of electable, I mean, what's the problem with that logic that somebody is not electable if they're not from the duopoly?
Well, it just continues the system. So people will say, well, I like what Jill Stein says, but she's not electable, so I'm not going to vote for her. Well, she's electable if you vote for her. They try to create an image of invincibility that even after they lose, they do that. And they will lead people to, instead of people being told, if this party is really expressing what you want and that makes them viable, and you can help yourself by voting for them, you're told the opposite. Don't vote for them. You're wasting your vote. So people are electable if you vote for them. So that's not the reason because someone has been excluded because their party is small. Well, you can make them a bigger party if that's what you really want. But they also use fear. And here it's, well, if people who didn't vote for Hillary, we ended up with Trump, so it was your fault. And I try to tell people, stop being so afraid, especially, and this is unfortunately a very successful message with Black people.
Yes.
Cling to the Democratic Party. And I try to remind people, whatever gains we got, we're the ones who got them. It wasn't, as I said, that there was a good for Black people president. It's that Black people mobilized and forced his hand. We can do that again. We don't have to be tied to this party that doesn't represent us and only comes around at election time. We can do that. So that's my argument against the not electable argument. Someone's electable if you vote for them. Are they saying what you want to hear? Then that you should vote for them, period. And don't allow yourself to be cowed. Don't allow yourself to live in fear. Support those parties that represent you. And remember that you also have to do the work yourself of organizing and mobilizing and making political demands.
All right. Because Black Agenda Report also is concerned about Africa, I would like to hear if you have any comment about, would a Trump or Kamala Harris presidency change anything towards the African continent? Because there are Africans, especially the educated class, who tend to be quite conservative. They're saying they support Trump because the Democrats bombed Libya. They destroyed Libya. They've destroyed Africa with AFRICOM. So, and Trump is not a hypocrite. He will not lie. That's what they're saying. So, what's for us Africans from the continent? Will Kamala or Trump change anything? Whoever wins.
Well, they're correct. It was the Democratic administration. It was Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, who was the Secretary of State, who destroyed Libya. That's correct. But that was a bipartisan policy. So Republicans were not in opposition. AFRICOM came into being with George in the last months of George W. Bush's administration, but was really strengthened by Obama. That's true. But Republicans aren't opposed to AFRICOM. They like the idea of there being U.S. bases and the U.S. integrating the militaries of other countries into the U.S. So the response to that is, yeah, Democrats did those things, but with the help of Republicans. Republicans were not opposed. As I was saying in my comments about the CEO of Boeing, it's bipartisan. U.S. imperialism is a bipartisan project, and you're not going to get anything different from Democrats than from Republicans. Of course, Trump lies. They all lies. Now, he doesn't, someone pointed out to me, Trump lies about things that are trivial, which is why it's so silly for him to lie. He'll say, I had a bigger crowd on my inauguration day than Obama did. He didn't, but who cares? It's one of the quirks and flaws of his character that he's obsessed with these stupid things. Like, why do you care if the other guy had a bigger crowd? You were being inaugurated president. I wouldn't care if I had a smaller crowd. So he will lie about something like that, and people say, "Oh, you see, Trump is a liar," but it's about something stupid. So who cares? Other people lie about things that are far more important. I think there is going to be a big issue in the campaign, and that's the issue of Gaza. There are people who are thoroughly disgusted by Joe Biden writing a blank check to Netanyahu, continuing to fund these war crimes, the genocide against the people of Gaza. And that is going to be a big issue. There are people who will not vote for Kamala Harris. Now, they're trying to, it's a public relations ruse. So she will say, I'm working for a ceasefire. I'm working for a ceasefire. But she's still going to give weapons to Israel. So the only ceasefire can come if you stop arming Israel. So anything else is phony. So you get this double talk. Because they say, well, Israel prefers Trump. Israel doesn't care. They get what they want, whether there's a Democrat or a Republican. So the issue of Gaza, there are not large in number, but in states, remember I talked about those states that really count. For example, Michigan. Michigan has a large Arab population, a large Muslim population. And it's enough people to determine who wins that state and who, therefore, wins the presidency. So that is a new issue this year, an issue that's really being talked about in the presidential election. So we shall see. That's going to be important. Which is why, and talk about lying, that's why the Democrats are lying about actually having Kamala Harris having a different policy than Biden. She does not. And Trump, they are together. They are together on this. Democrats and Republicans do not differ in their responses to Israel, but they pretend in order to fool people and to get their votes. And I feel like I got off topic there.
So, no. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. So basically, because Africa is not going to show up in the conversations, but I guess it's the same thing, really, that it doesn't matter who wins. America's policy is the same towards us.
Towards the whole world. I remember recently Vladimir Putin said, I don't care who wins. There was this whole story about him backing Trump, and which was a lie invented by the Democrats to both to keep that policy from changing and to absolve Hillary Clinton of blame for losing. But he said, it doesn't matter who wins. U.S. policy towards Russia isn't going to change. China knows that too. And I'm glad, I hope Africans also know that. So the bipartisan policy of the U.S. is imperialism. It's interfering in the affairs of other countries. It's proxy wars, as in Libya. It is, and in the case of your country, getting Kenya to serve as foot soldiers in Haiti.
Yeah.
None of that will be different whether there's a Democrat or a Republican.
Okay. Oh, wow. Thank you so much. I think we Africans, or at least in Kenya, we don't know so much about the intrigues of American politics, because what we get is from CNN, and CNN is very picky about what they tell us about the US. So thank you so much. And solidarity to Black Agenda Report. I listen to you a lot. I listen to your podcast.
Oh, thank you.
I read you, and I'm encouraging Kenyans to do the same. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.